Hey guys, how are you all doing? This is the MMA breakdown with my predictions for UFC 165, Jones versus Gustafsson, taking place next weekend. Getting my picks in a week early. Let's get right to it. My quick thoughts on the main card. Pretty good. There's a few fights there I don't think that I wouldn't typically want to see. I wouldn't want to pay money for. Schaub versus Mitrione and Philippou versus Carmont. I think those have the potential to be boring fights, but two title fights. That's really what they're selling this card on. And Pat Healy versus Habib Nurmagomedov should be a great fight. So let's start off with the Facebook prelim card at heavyweight. Nandor Guillermo is taking on Daniel Omielanczak. Probably butchered that last name, but never heard of Daniel O. And Guillermo, I only know from his last fight getting submitted by Josh Barnett. Guillermo, though, I think was on a big win streak before he fought Barnett. It doesn't seem like it was against any recognizable competition. And the other guy doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. So I'll just go with Guillermo, I guess. Looks like he's been around for a while. A few years. I'll just take Guillermo, but I don't have any analysis to give on this fight. I've never heard of the other guy, and I barely know Guillermo. Next up at bantamweight, Roland Delorme is taking on Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres. Delorme, he's a guy who was really forgotten on the Tough show. He was on the Tough 14 season. He got beat by Dillashaw on the show, but then they brought him to the finale and into the UFC. He really surprised me. Got a finish of I can't think of the guy's name. BJ something. No, Josh Ferguson on the Tough 14 finale. Got a finish there. Then finished Nick Denis after Nick Denis had a great debut. Got knocked out by Rivera, and then after a long layoff, beat a year layoff almost. He beat Edwin Figueroa, but a lot of people thought he lost that fight. That fight was back and forth. But on several occasions, I remember Delorme being in bad spots, nearly being finished, and his cardio really waned in that fight. But I'm going to take Caceres. I think he's been more consistent, even though he's had a few performances that were pretty uneventful. I thought could have gone to the other guy. Delorme's a scrapper. He doesn't have great striking, but he's got kind of technical striking. I remember when he beat Ferguson, he basically put him down with like a step-in jab. Scrappy on the ground, has two rear naked choke wins, but Caceres, he's had a lot more fights in the UFC under his belt. And his move to bantamweight has really paid off for him. He had the loss against Figueroa, but there was like 2 groin kicks in that fight, and I thought he won that fight. But his last few fights, both against Japanese guys, Matanobu Tezuka and Kyung-Ho Kang, he got the decision both fights. Both of those fights I thought were pretty uneventful. Basically slow grappling matches. Delorme is going to really push the pace, and this is going to be a high-paced fight, but Caceres has shown he can be pretty innovative with his striking, throws unorthodox stuff, uses really good movement. So I think he's going to be able to beat Delorme. I don't think he'll finish him, but probably get a decision. Delorme, though, he's scrappy, and I think he's talented enough to pull it off, but I'm going to take Caceres by decision. Next up at lightweight, Jesse Ronson versus Mikel Prazeres. Jesse Ronson doesn't even have a page here. I guess he's a newcomer, never heard of him. And Mikel Prazeres, I remember he fought Paulo Thiago a few months back. I think that was the Belfort Rockhold card, but I thought he won that fight against Thiago. Not much happened in that fight. He basically held him up against the fence, tried to work for the takedown a lot. The decision went to Thiago. Again, can't give much analysis. I don't know Jesse Ronson. I'll go with Prazeres because he's already had a fight, and I thought he beat Paulo Thiago in his last fight. So obviously, if he can hang with Paulo Thiago, a guy who's had some success in the UFC, I think he can take on a newcomer, but who knows? I don't know anything about Jesse Ronson. And then the last fight on the Facebook prelim card at lightweight, John the Bull Makdessi taking on Hene Forch. Makdessi's been on a roll. He's had some real good wins under his belt. Sam Stout and Darren Cruikshank is on a 2-fight win streak. I actually thought he lost against Stout, but the fight against Cruikshank, he was able to really shut down Cruikshank's striking game. Makdessi is basically a kickboxer. He has had he's had one knockout in the UFC. It was a spinning back fist, so we know he has some good, dangerous techniques. But he's basically a solid kickboxer. Doesn't use the wrestling or the ground game at all. He's been exposed there. Against Hene Forch, Hene Forch is a ground guy. In his fight against Terry Edom, basically used wrestling to hold him down and just pounded on him the whole fight. But I think I'm going to have to go with, I don't know, because Makdessi, I think, will have a big advantage on the feet. You can just outpoint him all day. He has a really good jab and manages distance very well. But Hene Forch, I think he might be able to get him on the ground and either submit him from there or ride out a decision using wrestling and getting top control. We saw Makdessi falter against Dennis Hallman, got taken down and choked out really quickly, and Hene Forch, I'm sure, is a lot more athletic than Hallman, but yeah, I'm going to go with Hene Forch in the upset. I think he's going to get it done with wrestling. And then on to the Fox Sports 1 prelim card at bantamweight. Mitch Gagnon is fighting Dustin Kimura. Gagnon coming off a big layoff, but his last fight was really impressive. Fought Weil Watson, hit him with a huge overhand, put him down, and quickly took the back, choked him out. Before that, he lost to Brian Caraway in a really back-and-forth fight. It was really scrappy, but eventually got submitted by Caraway. Dustin Kimura also had a great debut against Chico Camus. Showed a very good guard, very good offensive guard. Camus was on top a lot in that fight, but it was basically just defending submissions from Kimura. And then I think he won by rear naked. Yeah, won by rear naked choke against Camus. But I'm gonna go with Gagnon. Kimura's stand-up game, I don't think we saw. We still don't know too much about it, and we know Gagnon has big power, and he's a really strong guy. He's got a big physique for that weight class. I'm gonna go with Gagnon by either KO or submission. And I don't know if Kimura has the wrestling to get Gagnon down, because in his fight against Camus, if I remember correctly, it was Camus who was taking Kimura down a lot, and that's how Kimura was able to use his submission game. But next up at welterweight, Chris Clements versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Stephen Thompson, I was on the hype train all the way when he came into the UFC with that great knockout over Dan something, can't remember his name, but I thought he was going to be real good, and then he fought Matt Brown and, was basically exposed. And then his last fight against Nishan Burrell, I was really unimpressed. He uses a karate stance, but Burrell, a boxer, was able to really come forward and kind of nullify his whole karate striking game. And Thompson doesn't, when he uses that karate stance, he really can't manage distance well. And Burrell was just closing him that whole time, and Thompson was basically throwing body kicks with the guy right in front of him. So I think he's really been exposed, and his cardio was kind of bad in that fight too. Clements, really active striker, beat Keith Wisniewski in the UFC, and then was doing really well against Matthew Riddle before he got submitted. Clements is a real active striker, and he also throws a lot of unorthodox stuff like spinning back fists, spinning back kicks, things like that. High volume striker. Stephen Thompson, obviously he has some good techniques, but I just don't think he can implement them well in MMA. Like I said, Nishan Burrell really was able to close the distance against Thompson very well in his last fight, even though Thompson won that fight. But I think Clements is going to get it done decision. Next up at bantamweight, Ivan Menjivar against Wilson Reyes. Wilson Reyes, I think this guy's from Bellator, but I'd never seen him fight. I'm not familiar with him. He's on a 4-fight win streak. Seems to be a submission guy. And Ivan Menjivar, though, just a really savvy, seasoned veteran. Had a really nice armbar win a few fights ago against Azamat Gashimov. He's capable on the ground. On the feet, he doesn't have huge power, but he's really capable there. Hasn't been finished in a long he was finished in his last fight by Faber, but before that hadn't been finished in a long time. He's just a solid, savvy guy. Never does anything incredible, but he's a guy with a lot of heart. He's a brawler, still has good technique. I'm going to go with Menjivar here, just because I don't know much about Reyes, and Menjivar has been pretty exciting, and he wins the fights that he's supposed to that are not against elite guys. I'm going to take Menjivar by decision. Well, decision, stoppage, I don't know. Next up, last fight on the Fox Sports 1 prelim card at lightweight, Mike Ricci taking on Miles Jury. I think this is a very interesting fight. Miles Jury, he's really come out of nowhere. He was on, I remember when this guy was on Tough 13, I think it was, or Tough 14. Yeah, it was Tough 14, the Lesnar Dos Santos season, and he was injured, he made it into the house, but he had a knee injury, and they, sent him home, but then they brought him back for Tough 15, the live season, and he's done real well coming in the UFC. He beat, I can't remember any of these guys' names. Chris Saunders submitted him at the Tough 15 finale, and then had a huge breakout performance against Michael Johnson. Totally outworked him, out-wrestled him, and then knocked out Ramsey Najim. The guy's he's got a really kind of unique, awkward style. his grappling and wrestling is really funky. It's not double legs and working for takedowns, but he'll tie guys up in the clinch and use kind of weird leg trips, things like that, to get guys down. He's really composed. Doesn't seem to, he just seems very calm out there, very composed in what he's doing with his grappling and his striking against Nijim. Very kind of unexpected and awkward. As I remember it, he caught him with he was moving backwards and Nijim was coming forward with a barrage, and as he was moving backwards, he basically just found an opening as he was moving backwards and just planted his feet and threw an overhand. It was beautiful and caught Nijim right on the chin. Perfect timing. The guy's real technical, real kind of funky with his wrestling and striking. And I think he's going to beat Mike Ricci. Mike Ricci coming off Tough 16. He had some kind of slow fights in the house, basically out-grappled guys without even showing great wrestling or a great ground game. But then in the fight to get to the finale where he fought Neil Magny, I thought Neil Magny was a good guy on that show, and Ricci totally destroyed him, just viciously knocked him out. I thought Ricci was going to be a real special guy in the UFC, but then he lost the finale fight to Colton Smith, just totally horribly out-wrestled, showed he couldn't defend the takedown and couldn't do anything on the ground. And then fought Colin Fletcher after that, where, basically outpointed him, outstruck him, and ended up on top a lot on the ground, but never really seemed to have the killer instinct or turn the heat on. Jury, though, because we've seen Ricci exposed on the ground, I think Jury will easily be able to out-grapple, out-wrestle him. On the feet, though, it could be a little interesting. Ricci might have the power advantage, but, Jury really surprised us in the last fight with his KO of Nijim. But I think most likely Jury's going to out-grapple and out-wrestle him. So Jury by decision. Moving on to the main card at lightweight. Pat Bam Bam Healy taking on Habib Nurmagomedov. Both guys have been super impressive. I was super impressed with Healy in his last fight against Jim Miller. Out-grappled, out-wrestled Jim Miller and eventually choked him unconscious. Miller's a guy I've always had a lot of respect for. I consider him in the elite of the lightweight division, and Healy was kind of the first non-elite guy, to beat Jim Miller. Miller had lost to Ben Henderson, Nate Diaz, but Healy is kind of the first, middle to lower upper tier guy to beat Jim Miller, and he finished him viciously. Habib Nurmagomedov, he's been on a roll. He's had great performances, but I think people are a little quick to, build this guy up. Obviously, he's had great wins over veterans. Finished Kamal Shalarus in his UFC debut. Then had a decision win against Tebow, which I was very impressed by, because Tebow, he's got a lot of UFC experience and he's done really well. Then he had a vicious KO of Thiago Tavares, and his last fight showed very good wrestling and control against Abel Trujillo. But Pat Healy, I don't think people are giving this guy enough credit. Like I said, super impressed by his last win over Jim Miller. I can see either guy winning. I can see Nurmagomedov out-wrestling him. But Pat Healy, I think he has, he has a great motor, great cardio. I think he can break Nurmagomedov. The striking, I'd say Nurmagomedov has the power. We saw him put out Tavares. Probably has more of the killer instinct, but Pat Healy, he's got good submissions, a good ground game, a real workhorse. I'm going to take Healy in the upset. I think he'll be able to basically out-wrestle Nurmagomedov. But I can totally see Nurmagomedov winning too, but I'm going to take Pat Healy by decision. Next up, at middleweight, Costa Philippou versus Francis Carmont. Philippou's been on a roll, but he's had a long layoff. On a 5-fight win streak, beating Jorge Rivera. The breakout performance against Hammond, where he really showed how dangerous his hands are. Then had a great win where he just shut down and dominated Court McGee on the feet. After that, beat Ricky Fukuda, and then his last fight, last December, beat Tim Boetsch in a fight that I didn't really take anything away from it. Because Tim Boetsch was headbutted and eye poked in that fight, and he was basically defenseless after that. But Philippou still managed to finish him. But I think Philippou's got great hands, great hand speed, really big power. Guys don't seem to be able to get the takedown on him. He's faced good wrestlers like Court McGee, Ricky Fukuda, and they weren't able to, I don't think either of those guys took him down once. But real dangerous hands Philippou has. And Francis Carmont, kind of the opposite. He's been a submission guy in the UFC. He came in really solid, took out a lot of good guys. Chris Camozzi, then submitted Magnus Siedenblad, submitted Carlos Vemola. But then his last two fights against Lawler and Larkin, seemed really content to sit back, didn't do much, never went for the kill. He was sloppy in both those fights, but somehow managed to get the decisions. But I thought he clearly lost both of those fights. So in my mind, Carmont's, he's kind of on a losing streak a little bit, and I just don't think he has the hands. I don't think he'll be able to take Philippou down. I just don't think his game is as good in any area as Philippou. Philippou's also shown, he's capable on the ground. I remember he had an omoplata locked up on Jorge Rivera. He's Matt Serra's guy. I think he's just going to be better on the ground and on the feet. I just don't think Carmont has a chance. Carmont trains with GSP. He's shown some, decent striking, not very refined in the UFC, but Philippou, I think he's going to knock him out first or second round. Just big power, great hand speed. Next up, at heavyweight, Brendan Schaub taking on Matt Mitrione. Both these guys were red hot when they came into the UFC, and both have kind of faltered lately. Mitrione got knocked out by Roy Nelson in December, and then it came back with his typical signature first round KO of Philip DeFries. And Brendan Schaub, after just being so impressive coming into the UFC after TUF, beat veteran guys like Gabriel Gonzaga, Crow Cop, got knocked out by Nogueira, got knocked out by Rothwell, and then totally revamped his game against LeVar Johnson, just out-wrestled him. I don't think Schaub's submission game is any good. LeVar Johnson is horrible on the ground. Pat Barry nearly submitted the guy, and Schaub wasn't able to work any submissions. He had a Darce choke briefly, but wasn't able to finish it. And basically just kind of lay and prayed LeVar Johnson. Schaub, though, when he strikes, I think he's a good striker. He's dangerous, but against the higher level guys who are more technical with their striking, guys who have more knockout power, They've been able to connect with his chin and put him out. Mitrione obviously has big power. We never see any of his ground game much. The most we've seen of his ground game was way back when he fought Kimbo Slice, and then when Czech Congo took him to the ground, he basically couldn't do anything from there. It's going to come down to Mitrione's power versus Schaub's wrestling. I think he's going to try to do the same thing that he did against LeVar Johnson. I'm really interested to see if Mitrione has anything from his guard. I remember he used his guard against Kimbo Slice. I kind of think Schaub's wrestling is going to be too stifling for Mitrione. It's going to get the job done. But LeVar Johnson in that fight, he was able to really beat up Schaub a lot with very little of the fight being contested on the feet. Schaub's face was really beat up. I think, I could see Mitrione connecting early, or even as the fight goes on, even if he gets taken down, anytime they're on the feet, I can see Mitrione connecting, but I'm going to take Schaub by decision. I think he's going to be able to get the takedown and hold down Mitrione. And then next up, the co-main event bantamweight fight for the interim title. Interim champ Hayden Barrow taking on Eddie Wineland. I've been so impressed with Eddie Wineland's turnaround. I remember coming to the UFC, that fight against Faber. He actually came out, looked great in the first round. Was able to get a few takedowns on Faber, fend off the takedown, land some strikes, but ended up losing that fight. And then against Joe Benavidez, he looked like, a mentally broken guy, was just really content to sit back, did nothing in that fight, never made a big move. Benavidez won a decision against him, and then a year later rebounded with an incredible knockout over Scott Jorgensen. And Scott Jorgensen, you never see that guy get even rocked on the feet, or much less put out. And Eddie Wineland knocked him out cold. I was so impressed with that performance by Wineland. And then followed it up with a great performance over Brad Pickett. Really used his distance, used his reach to keep Pickett on the outside, never let him get inside. Showed great range striking and very technical striking in that fight. I want to see, I'm trying to look up their reach and their height. Eddie Wineland is 5'7", the 69-inch reach, and Barrow is also 5'7", with a 70-inch reach. So they're basically the same height and have the same reach. I wanted to look that up because I was thinking if Wineland is taller and had a reach advantage, I think he would be able to, use that range like he did against Pickett, against Barrow. I thought that might be his game plan, but it looks like they're even there. Barrow, he's a great guy, and he's really overshadowed by Dominic Cruz being out. But this guy's had great performances. Destroyed Pickett, beat Scott Jorgensen by decision, beat Faber, and then finished, after 2 decisions, finished Michael McDonald in a fight where he was, challenged. He even got knocked down briefly there by McDonald. But the guy's really good on the feet. In the McDonald fight, he showed really good striking. He manages distance. He's good at really flipping the switch and turning up the heat, and then kind of, calming down, composing himself after that. He'll pick his moments to really go after his opponents really well with flurries and barrages. And he's got a good ground game. We saw him finish Michael McDonald with an arm triangle choke in the last fight. And against Pickett, when he put him, after knocking him down on the feet, he took the back so quickly that I still remember that vividly. submitting Pickett. How fast he took the back was just incredible. So the guy's very skilled on the ground. Wineland, we haven't seen too much of his ground game. He's basically been a stand-up guy. Power advantage, I'm going to give it to Wineland. I also will give Wineland the kind of the advantage striking at distance. But Barao, I think he's going to be able to close the distance, really land his